Hey guys, it is our final presentation of Hackfort this year. I can't believe we made it this far. This is, yeah, he's been closing it down for me. Oh my God, thank you guys so much. It's been a wild Hackfort this year. I mean, wow, I was totally surprised by how many people came in. It's really humbling. Our team had a lot of fun. I couldn't have done it without all my volunteers and friends. We were running around. If you saw me, I was usually running somewhere.
It's very cool.
But I'm super pumped to have Ryan out in person. He did join us virtually last year, which was great. But I've just been so moved by what he and Mike Wilson and other members of his team have been doing with Deepwell. This is the next best thing. If you're into video games and you're into what they can do, I'm excited. And so, Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you. We will have someone to pass around a microphone for, once we get to Q&A. This is being recorded, so try to get all those questions on tape. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Ryan.
Cool. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That's my family, and they're going to cheer a lot. They're here to do that for me. I'm going to talk to you about a journey I'm on right now. I'm in the middle of it. And for any of you that saw this last year, it's a bit of an update. But I'll start at the beginning. I'm going to start before the beginning of the beginning to tell you a little bit about me. And to do that, I need to just know a little bit about you. I'm going to start with the idea is, who here is a software programmer of some type? Put your hand up. Get it up there, you two. Okay. How about a video game developer? Come on. There they are. I mean, that's Eyes Out Studio sitting right there, right? How many people play video games? All right. Hold your hands up. No, keep them up for a second. I'm going to ask you this one because, I'm taking back the power here. There's just one of me. I'm doing this with you guys. How many of you have felt something from that game? So when you were in a dark place or had a tough thing going on in your world, that game did something for you, held you in a place. Okay, great. That sets the tone for what we're going to be talking about. And it's really interesting because how many of you at the same time have been told by somebody or heard from somebody or otherwise read about just how bad video games are for you? How do we reconcile that, right? Whole room, right? And we'll just finish up with one more quick thing. How many people would actually say they've suffered from some sort of addiction to the game where they were unable to? Okay, and that's what we look like. Now the data comes down. So, and I'm going to tell you about why that is, how that works, but we're going to start with explaining what I am now. So you guys are game developers, game players, all that kind of stuff. I am none of those things. So why I'm going to talk to you is maybe confusing. I'm a therapy designer. And what I've been doing for 20 years is constructing medical devices. I'm part of a team, or was part of an amazing team. And over 20 years, we did something that's a little unheard of. We commercialized 20 different devices. And they were in the realm of everything from minimally invasive things that go inside your body and change what they're doing, all the way to AI-driven robotics. So a broad breadth of what we were doing. We were big into robotics, and we were really into what technology could do for people. How were we going to change folks' reality? And we really wanted to get medical care at home as much as possible. So we got very into personalized levels of care, home-based care, automation, and we were driven towards mental health as well. And so everything from light therapy, if you guys have ever used a Verilux light box, that was us, all the way to neurostimulators that could change your mood or alter your perception of pain. So a really big breadth of devices done over a pretty accelerated period of time. That's a device a year. It is, I'll just maybe check this one. Anybody here in the healthcare industry? Okay. So one person will tell you this, it's not easy to clear a medical device. So 20 and 20 years means we were rolling and sweating. And folks noticed. Big folks, big companies, Medtronic, United Healthcare, they took notice of our team and they gave us the thing that many of us seek, an exit. In 2019, we started having conversations about really big numbers and really big opportunities to be done. And this was a moment where I could pause. So I left Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is kind of the hub of where medical device is going on at the moment. Medtronic's based out of there. JJ's based out of there. Boston Scientific is based out of there. Confusing, I know, but that's where they are. Right, and moved with my family. We went to Vancouver Island. And, prepared for, the next phase of our lives after what had been happening essentially since my older boys had been alive. Things were going to change. When I moved to that island, I met a man named Mike Wilson. And he was on a very similar trajectory. He was heading towards 50. He had built a very successful company, but this one was in video games. He was the largest independent video game publisher in the world. It's called Devolver. They had made some amazing titles, and they were going public. And he and I had this couple of things in common. We're going through this journey at the same time. This defining thing of who you are and what you've been doing for 20 years of your life is changing. We'd also both decided we weren't going to keep going on the trajectory with those organizations. So interestingly enough, we both went off to an island to kind of figure out what to do next. What we mostly did was drove our friends crazy because we were not quite 50 and we didn't have to work in that moment. We weren't allowed to work in anything else. We weren't allowed to touch the things we'd always been doing. So we were just driving people crazy, right? It's like, hey, let's play tennis. Let's go here. They're like, you've got to meet this guy and leave us alone. I got a job. I got to do stuff. I'll catch you on the weekend. So Mike and I started getting really close. We're going through this journey. It's financial, it's emotional, it's scary. And we started to get to know each other really well. And the next thing we found was that we shared a passion for a mental health situation, not only because both of us had ourselves suffered in various ways and our families had suffered in various ways, but because we had done what we could with our friends and tried to help in certain trajectories. I'd put a lot of devices in the field, and I started confessing to him this thing. Like, I'm a little concerned that I didn't really achieve what I wanted to. 20 devices in 20 years. All of these various forms of treatment were out there, but how are they being used? I already knew that the health system was broken. I knew that accessibility to the care and the things I'd built, no matter how low cost we made something, by the time it went through all sorts of distribution and found you, it was really expensive. And to get to it, you had to have a doctor who was really expensive. And you then had to understand how and have this massive commitment to the thing you were doing, which was the next problem that I talked to Mike about. I'm like, look, when I tell you about the things we do to get a medical device in the field, it really isn't about the patients. The clinicals and those sorts of things. If we sign you up in a clinical, you got something that's not right with you, and you're like, I want to be in that clinical. I'm going to go, okay, you can be in my clinical, but you can't F it up. You'll screw it up for everybody. We're watching you. People with white coats, PhDs, they're looking right at you. And if we're doing home-based healthcare, the weirdest thing about this is when we're all done the clinicals, we publish all the data, we get out in the world, we put this product in your hands, we don't watch you anymore. But you know what statistically you do? Anything but that. All right? So that was my confession to him. Mike had a really interesting confession to me. And I have permission for this because you obviously don't just turn your friends' life stories into talks without, especially when more of their friends are in the audience, and some of them are quite foreboding at times. What Mike was worried about was that potentially what he had done didn't matter. Or even worse, what if it had harmed? So this is 2019, and I don't know how much you guys know about what's going on in video games at the moment and in the mental health space, but there's something called the DSM. It's a book that's published for psychologists and psychiatrists. It's about billing and reimbursement and all this kind of thing. And it tells you what is and isn't a psychological or mental illness. And in 2019, they decided all of a sudden that video game addiction was a disease. Now look, we can get addicted to a lot of things. We can get addicted to another person. We can get addicted to exercise. We can get addicted to gambling. We can get addicted to just about anything. But typically in mental health, what we think of that as is a symptom of something. You're filling a hole in a place in yourself. But for some reason, and I think maybe politically sometimes we know the answer to this, this was termed a disease. And Mike was really freaked out. What did I make? I mean, and he didn't just make one or two of them, right? At the same time, we're going through this, all this is going on, a pandemic hits. All right. And simultaneously, Devolver puts out their biggest hit of all times, which is, by the way, very good for going public. St. Mike did well. But Fall Guys was this different kind of game and this different kind of situation for Devolver. And he was seeing this really interesting thing. On one side, the DSM, the Bible of mental health, is telling you, you've made something terrible. But he's getting a bunch of feedback from the folks that are using this game, and it's a coping mechanism. They're connected and they're finding hope and they're keeping their moods elevated in a time when we're all knowing things were a little crazy. How crazy? Well, if you're someone like me and you've been working in mental health a long time, what you heard about the pandemic didn't sound right. How many of you guys thought that as a result of the pandemic, or you've heard that there was a mental health emergency? Put up your hand as a result of that. Wrong. That mental health emergency started 60 years before that. We don't even know what to call this. Mental health tsunami? Something so enormous that we didn't even understand, and we could see it coming down the path, right? It's been predictable for a long time. There was not enough people to care for you. It was too expensive to get that care. And the care is really unpredictable. If you think of things like cognitive behavioral therapy, it has about a 60% success rate when you are perfectly matched with the right doctor and perfectly ready for the clinical outcome. If not, which is the case for most of us, here's your doc, good luck, here we go, 12%, right? So this thing is coming down, and it's coming down hard and fast. Mike and I are both really interconnected on this idea of we need to help more people. And he's getting all this feedback that his game can really help. And what was predicted, we know to be true at the moment, right? So as we sit here right now, there are 600 million people on this planet that are suffering from anxiety and depression. I don't mean mild to moderate. I don't mean to get up in the morning and not sure that you feel as good as you could, not quite sure if your energy's there. I mean debilitating levels. 600 million people. By 2030, the World Health Organization has been letting us know, and they didn't just tell us 2 years ago, that this is going to be the #1 cause of mortality. But look at our spend rate, 2%. And we don't even like to talk about it. And the worst part is, it's getting harder and harder by the moment to get some care. Because you know who else is suffering from this same phenomena? Those practitioners who are trying to help. They're burned out and they're, quitting at record numbers. So Mike starts imploring me. He's like, we got to do this. This game is working. We can help. We can reach people. And he was really motivated by that. But you guys, 20 years I've been putting these things out the door. I'm tired. And it wasn't a new problem to me. So it's one of those things where I was kind of going, and I know, and if anybody in the room knows Mike, he's not what I'll call a details guy. Right? So he's like, we should do this. You might notice Mike's not standing here at the moment. So we should do this. And I stopped and said, look, and then you got to also remember where I come from. I live in the world of, I'm not a PhD. I'm not an engineer. I dropped out of medical school. And ended up running a medical device company. I didn't really necessarily want to sneak back into the fray and be like, hey guys, I got news for you. Video games might be good for you. I'd already done that in light therapy, 2007, 2008, and was roasted on the spit once, and then came back around to be celebrated well after my reputation had had the crap kicked out of it several times. It was a little hard to feel great about this. But he compelled me enough. It's my family up here, and they are awesome. And they were coming off school for the summer, and none of them got a job. So I said, hey, there's a lot of data. As I dug in a little bit further to what Mike was talking about, and I should tell you as well, and I didn't mention it on that last slide, Mike had handed me this one study from Oxford too. There's this one thing, and all it really said was, playing games is looking like it's better for you than not. There's a wellness component here. And I was like, And it was from Oxford. I'm like, duck and cover. This is good news. So I said to these guys, first went out to my father-in-law, said, hey, who actually made it through medical school, and said, can I borrow your access? And went into the databases and looked at the studies. Thousands of them. So we all got together. We started ripping through these things and reading them. The boys broke up what sections they were going to look at. And we start seeing stuff like this. These commercial games, no intent whatsoever to treat anybody, were having major impact. And these studies are for real. These are coming out of universities. This is not, hey, let's get 10 friends together, play a little Animal Crossing and see if we feel better, right? This is statistically significant information. Plants vs. Zombies was reducing depression. I mean, really reducing depression. Animal Crossing, highly correlated to well-being. Tetris, this one's crazy. Look at this. 62% of people who played Tetris for 20 minutes while they were in the emergency room after they had been in a very alarming accident did not suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder relative to the cohort who filled out the form and just wrote about what they were doing. Okay, so it's not that bad for you potentially, and it could be this good for you potentially. What are we going to do? Well, we dug in deeper. Like, those are just a few games. We kept reading, and I was like, well, maybe it's just those games. They're kind of cutesy, pop can, right? It's going to be well, the deeper we went, the more we found. Look at these statistics. 69% of psychological therapy outcomes are improved with video games. Not everybody, and that's why you saw a couple hands go up, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. 24% fewer depressive symptoms for young boys who played video games most days. The things that our parents are often telling us not to do. And this one was incredible. 90 minutes of daily video game play resulted in lethargy and dropping out of school and No, it turned out it was, positive mental health, improved physical activity, and better self-esteem. So there it all is. I still don't want to go. I'm trying to convince Mike we just got to get better at tennis. This is going to be okay. We don't have to do this. But remember, on my journey, I was a little worried that we hadn't really reached what is actually in healthcare called the trifecta. When you want to create a new modality of care, you look for its ability to be cost-effective, accessible, and compliant. I'd crack cost. We had taken certain devices that cost thousands of dollars, got them down to hundreds, and sometimes down to 10 or 20 bucks. I will tell you a dirty little secret. We get it down to 10 or 20 bucks, the margins just upstream of us just went up. So it got a little frustrating because that 10 and 20 didn't always reach you guys. So that impacted accessibility. We'd done a good job. We took things that you had to do in a clinic. So for instance, we took lymphedema treatment, which is for breast cancer survivors, where you have to go to the clinic 3 times a week, get massaged and get recirculated. Otherwise you can get elephantitis, all sorts of infections. We got that into the home. Launched that off as a different company, and that company went public and was super successful and reached a lot of people. So we were accessible. Compliance. So when you build a medical device, something electromechanical, one of the things that the agency wants you to do is you have to be ready to support it in the field. So we would build these teams, and it's our job. If you have lymphedema, for instance, and you're relying on this device and you need it every week, if something goes wrong, we need to pass one in the air to you. We need to do something to get you treatment and keep that treatment in place. Same thing with light therapy devices. They're going to last for so long. If you went out to Costco and you bought a Verilux light box and stuff like that, we wanted to keep you in a place where you were going to be healthy for a long period of time. So we built these repair centers. You know what the problem with them was? They were empty. Now, on one level, you can think it's because we're the best engineers you've ever met. Our shit don't break. But some of this stuff had motors in it. And when a motor runs a certain period of time, it's just the end of the life of the motor. We didn't see enough of them back. I was really worried about compliance. I'm going to read this quote to you. This was the one that just kind of kicked me to the place where I knew we had to go. Pandemic is really starting to boil. And I think we all remember that time when we thought it was going to be 90 days and then maybe another 90 days. Well, for those of us, so in 2008, I worked on H1N1 and using UVC to sanitize surfaces and stuff like that. So I had to work with folks that like virologists and stuff like that who can scare the crap out of you with everything they know. And I could feel very quickly that this was going to get bigger. And that meant the tail of it, the mental health implications, was going to get bigger. I'll tell you why about that in a second. So Arianna Huffington does this article in Fortune. And I'm going to read this to you, not that you can't read it yourself, but there's no better way to help people improve their lives than meeting them where they are. And where 3 billion of them are is on gaming platforms. That was it. He got me. Plus, I'm really shitty at tennis. So we did it. We launched DeepWell. What was it going to do? We weren't sure. How was it going to work? We did not know. So what we did is what Mike and I kind of do the best. We called out to industry, to the folks we knew, and said, look, we understand games are accidentally very, very therapeutic. We've got to figure out how to put this together. So Mike said he knows a few people that make video games. Some of these people turned up. If you've ever played Doom or Quake or Oddworld or Lego Battles, Zoe Flowers, like amazing people, top-end game designers showed up. I picked up the phone too. I was a little nervous. I'm like, hey, PhD buddies, who wants to talk about video games as treatments? You cannot believe who arrived. I know these aren't superstars in your world, but in my world, that's Sam Browd. Sam Browd invented the football helmet that Mahomes is running around with in the moment that prevents concussion. He's a pediatric neurosurgeon. When he has a little extra time, he's a neuroscientist, right? Lisa Marin, she just built an entire program at OHU that teaches psychologists how to be psychologists. Emery Porter did her entire PhD under the tutelage of the woman who was the executive editor of Psychology Today, looking at how video games could impact health. Every one of these folks, Jeff Hopkins is a world-renowned educator. He built the program and the system that Elon Musk school uses and stuff like that. I mean, very paced, individual-based learning. Dr. Justin Sitzma is he has a doctorate in philosophy of science, and he's your classic monkey wrench. He gets in there and breaks fucking everything, right? Just when you think something's working, he's like, no, you're completely wrong. All right. Dr. Len Hadley, well, he's my father-in-law. I like him best of all. But he also is just, in Canada, our medical system is kind of crazy. And as a doctor, he served 3,500 patients. And what he saw, they was underserved mental health. And he started mental health clinics as well on the side. So these folks knew what they were doing. But when I say people showed up, folks, Shahid Ahmad, so that's from Sony. He's the one that really brought the independent gaming movement into Sony. Matt Hooper is just directing, engineering at Oculus. Kate Edwards, president of the International Game Jam Association. Scott Phillips is a world-renowned medical device designer. All of these people. Chris Kenterwitz, I don't know what he does, but he knows everybody. And Tom Gund is an amazing director, video games. When I'm saying they showed up, they showed up. Look at them all. There could be like 2 more pages of lawyers. A lot of lawyers showed up. Not a one of them was getting paid. They were just here to help. We were figuring this out. And what we were going to do is, Mike said, it's the independent game developers you got to find. Those people know how to tell a story. They're in this for the right reason. Beginning, middles, and ends, right? And he was saying, because I was still saying, look, and a few of you put up your hand and said, games have been bad for me. And that was interesting as a therapy designer, because I did this with light therapy, and I do this with every potential thing I'm looking at as a therapeutic. If I'm looking for whether or not something's powerful, I push it out to its boundary conditions. And on the edge of those boundary conditions, if I find harm, I've got a therapy. Somewhere in the middle, as I draw it in, I have the ability to treat. Now, if we're talking about fentanyl, for instance, that margin of error is like really, really small, and I don't necessarily suggest you give that a shot. But in the case of light, we found in the greatest boundary conditions, absolutely no light. Well, that's going to put you in a place where your circadian rhythms will not entrain. Your body's going to do weird stuff. You're not going to be able to function appropriately. All light all the time, well, that just equals insanity, right? That's a torture. And the same thing we were seeing here with games. There were boundary conditions, we knew that. But in the middle, there was a lot of therapeutic potential. So we had all these amazing advisors. And we had the independent gaming company. And we had Kate, who knew how to throw game jams. So we threw one. A big one. Again, you get Mike Wilson to say, hey guys, please, I want to make some games. A couple thousand people show up. 108 games were produced. And you know what? They were beautiful, well-formulated, amazing things, but not one of them was what we were looking for. Not a one. What did we get? We got a lot of gamified therapies. We got a lot of edutainment, educational kind of things to make you aware of something. And we got a lot of empathy-based games. And look, these are really important. They helped you play as somebody who had a mental illness and understand that better. But none of these were the ones that didn't look like they were going to treat you and then ended up treating you. We had to pause now. What were we going to do now? We'd put all this energy, all this time. Pandemic's not getting any better. This didn't go really well. We awarded the prize money, thanked everybody for the things they'd done, picked the best of what we could, and really focused on those empathy games. And we started tearing it down. What had happened? 2 major lessons. So for all of the folks that I'd called and out to in neuroscience, I didn't look into this really interesting specialty. Did you know there's PhDs and all they study is play. They study what your brain looks like when you play. They study what happens as an impact of that play, how bioavailable you become. And what we know is when you play, when you have fun, when you're dopaminergic, oh my God, not dopamine. When you're dopaminergic, you are in the state where you are much more available to learn new things. You're in a state where you're both consciously and subconsciously available. So what we had seen in Plants vs. Zombies and all these other things, they're games. You're having fun, right? And as we were digging in deeper and I'm learning more about how you make a game, remember, make medical devices, I don't know anything about this kind of stuff. First of all, making games is really, really hard. The reason it's really, really hard is the first thing you got to find is the fun. This little kernel of play sits right in the middle. Some of the game designers make card games and board games and all these sorts of things before they go anywhere near putting it into an actual video game environment. Even once you put it into the video game environment, the part that you do, the work you do that's called finding fun is the hardest part of it. You manipulate that environment. You move it around and around and around until that game is most attractive. And then eventually you stick on the secondary game mechanics. Scoring, badging, social. But those aren't the game. They're just enhancing and showing you what happened as a result of that play. So the first thing we learned is play was critical. And that tied into the second and most important thing we had learned. The game designers had been doing this for 40 years. They were behavioral scientists of their own making and style. And they knew something that none of us medical device people knew, which was how to engage. Right? But even they didn't recognize how powerful they were. In the space of being around a doctor or even around the concept of a therapy, when we look back and looked at all the games that they built, it's not like the doctors were telling them what to do. They were just there supporting them. But they would go out and read all these medical papers. They'd come back and they didn't start with that kernel of play. What do you think they started with? How about a therapeutic? At the core of the thing they were trying to build was something that wasn't fun. So what did they have left to do at that point? All they could do was surround it with the secondary game mechanics, scoring, badging, social. If you put scoring, badging, and social on something that isn't fun, let's say you put one on your wrist and it tells you every day how many steps you've been taking, every day that you kick ass, it tells you you're awesome, but it's a time bomb just waiting to tell you you suck, right? And you don't wanna, because you're back to the fundamental truth of how we work as human beings. We don't have the capability to longitudinally take care of ourselves. Nature didn't set us up like this. If something jumps out behind you right now, you've got an endorphin rush and you've got a choice to make. It's fight or flight and it's ingrained in you. Most of the decisions will be made in your spine before you even gets up to your brain, which is one of the reasons why you punch your brother in the face sometimes. At least that's the excuse you should use, right? If you're given a baby to take care of, you produce all this oxytocin and your brain gets to the place where you know exactly what to do. You've got modeling from the past, and if that's reasonable modeling, even if someone took a good care of a pet while they were taking care of you, you've got some sense of how to take care of that thing, and your brain is telling you to do it. But if you've got type 1 diabetes, what nature wants you to do is die before you procreate. Like that's really, think about it. Where's our motivation levels? We've seen studies on the easiest thing you could possibly do. We went and looked at hypertensive people. Right? Folks carrying the pounds, just like me. Right? All they had to do is pop a pill. What percentage of those people do you think did not take that pill? How about 50%? Unless, of course, you were morbidly obese, and then that was up at 80%. This is not like medication, psychological medication that puts you in some place where the side effects are considerable. We understand why it's hard to stay on that track. This is just take your pill. These are the people that were lucky enough to have healthcare, sought out the doctor, went through several different trials of pills till they found the pill that worked for them, went home with the pill and didn't take the pill. We're not wired that way. We're not bad people when we don't get on the treadmill. We're just not wired to do it, right? But there's these behavioral scientists. They've been getting you to push buttons, stare at screens, sit in diapers and eat Cheetos. I mean, they could compel you to some levels that were amazing, and we weren't listening to them and they weren't listening to themselves. At the same time that we were doing that work, Federica, who I'll say her first name because she's Italian and her last name I butcher every time, but we're going to go with Palacini for right now, was finishing up a study and we're working together with it. She went deep onto these commercial level video games and started figuring out that video games are very effective stress, anxiety treatments. They were surpassing medications in some case. EMDR, which is a style of therapy with eye movement involvement, visual spatial interference, standalone physiotherapies, talk therapies. In some cases, they were more effective than those treatments. But she also found something that we've all been thinking about. Not all commercial video games were created equal. There were some that weren't good for you, but it had nothing to do with how much fun you were having, how much dopamine was going in your brain. It's those secondary game mechanics. It's those energy dynamics that pull you in to preserve the work that you've already done, the money you've spent, and the time you've spent. They call you back, right? Your village needs you, right? Those were very, very different. And then there was a whole bunch that were, very, very effective. And I bet you know what those ones are, aren't you? You guys thinking about those brain teaser games, get a little smarter games? Not at all. Let's take some shots at it. What do you think was the number one most effective video game for treating people? Any takers? No. Minecrafting. You'd think, right? You're still thinking about, nope. Not a game. Let's think about a type of game. Action games. Action games. First-person shooters. It turns out they don't make shooters. If any of you have played a little Call of Duty, I'm sure you haven't thought, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm just going to wander out and see if I could pick a few people off. That's more like a game of capture the flag, and it gets you very engaged. It's got team-level social components to it, and it keeps you engaged and immersed in the moment. The ones that worked the best told a good story. They drove a narrative, and they had a game mechanic that could overlap with the treatment mechanism. There you go. So now this is really complicated, and we're not out to make this proprietary. We filed patents and all that kind of good stuff, but it's because we want to enable people to use this for good versus evil. So much so that if you wander out to LinkedIn, you're going to find that we did 100 days of posts about and showed you all of the studies we looked at and how this stuff works. So the kind of game dynamics you're looking at when you can take agency over a situation, right? Role playing and your ability to get in a certain scenario. And this is where it gets really interesting. This is something I was talking to Eyes Out about yesterday. It turns out if where your particular mental health issue came from was something kind of dark, you might need something dark to get out of there. Butterflies and rainbows aren't going to find you if you've been somewhere that was hard to come out of. And if you need to get into that world and get agency and control over that world, that has to be a relatable experience. So horror games, shooters, action, puzzlers, these things were working. So it's landed me at this place, out as a therapy designer, no idea how to make a video game. You check with my team. They definitely I'll be like, hey, how's that going over there? Like, we'll get back to you. It's all good. Therapies can't just be gamified. I'm not picking on gamification. I'm saying if you want to see the kind of results that they were seeing with those commercial level video games, you can't gamify a therapy. Instead, you've got to take these really captivating games and you've got to medicinalize them. We made up a word. Someone stole gamification, which was the right word, but they used it for something we didn't like. So medicinalizing these games is what we're out to do. We got to preserve and enhance that famously compelling nature. That thing that you few people who put your hands up as game designers know how to do, that medicine has no idea and isn't even close to doing, which is compelling people to take care of themselves. Where are we now? So I said it's a journey. It is a journey. When we recognized that we couldn't inform others on how to make these, and we talked to the FDA and the FTC and all these kind of things, we got ready to go, we realized we had to make some content ourselves. So we're making some games at the moment. Mike's gonna freak out. I'm gonna tell you something right now. First one is a shooter on rails. It's in VR, right? And so we're doing our work with the agency, we're doing our work to prove these things out, and we're gonna show instead of tell. But we don't want to be the content developers. We're here to get you to be the content developers. So our long range plan is to build tools and systems and processes so you don't have to know what I know about the agency and how hard it is to get these things cleared. We want to get you to the place that you can talk to people about your game being something that treats anxiety, something that treats depression, and not have the FDA knock on your door or, God forbid, the FTC. And these are hard agencies to deal with. They will shut you down. They've taken down multi-million and billion-dollar companies. They are pacing around some of the biggest social media companies at the moment, and they're scared for a reason. But there's a right way to do this. We're trying to help justify the difference between how the FDA is often thought about software, which is how you make a pacemaker. And it's this very locked down. And you saw in the room who are the game designers. Watch their faces when I see this. You get to write it once. You have to validate it 10 times. And if the module touches any other module, you have to validate it all again. You can't iterate. You can't change. You can't find the fun. Or if you do, it's 10 quality engineers for every one programmatic engineer. What does that do to your budget? All right, we got it. So we're changing that world. So that's where we are now. We're building these games. We're doing our best to make them fun and therapeutic at the same time. Show you guys what happens when you tell a good story, where the narrative holds you in a place where the game dynamic can overlap with a therapeutic mechanism in a way that you're just having fun. And we're getting access to this place where you're dopaminergic, you're learning fast, and we're keeping you busy with some visual spatial interference, like shooting things, so we get some access to your subconscious and maybe teach you how to react differently to a couple of things. Because if you think about a lot of the times in mental health, people often talk about, well, how did that person overcome this problem? That's actually not the question to ask. The question to ask is, how in the moment of panic did they choose to do the right thing over the wrong thing? We're one breath away from punching the wrong person in the face, hitting the accelerator when we should hit the brake, making a choice that changes everything for us, saying a thing that ends a relationship, right? And so in those moments, if we can get you to a place where you can learn something new, change that record that's been going over and over again in your head, now we've got some real therapeutic potential. And that's what we think you were seeing in the Animal Crossings and that kind of stuff. Just enough cognition so you turned off the internal talk and then access to autonomic function, changing how things would be preferentially done. What's next? You're going to be amazed who's reaching out. So as we get deeper and deeper into this, more scientists keep showing up. And it turns out when you're playing and you're having fun and you're dopaminergic, another thing that happens is your resistance starts to come down. Your body's natural reaction to what it sees as foreign invasion changes. That's an immunoresponse. Those immunoresponses cause rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's, but they also do things like make you resist your own therapies. So there's really interesting new drugs out there like JAK inhibitors. They go in and they target one little part of your immune system that's causing you all sorts of grief. There's only one catch with them. By the time you get the really useful doses, they get a little carcinogenic. But imagine a world where we could work together to build companion apps and games where we get you calm, we get you low, and we get you bioavailable and accessible to those therapies. Now we can drop those doses down. You can get the same sort of results that you would have expected to get, but less side effects. This is just one example where immersive medicine is heading. That's what it's going to look like, this convergence between entertainment and medicine that is going to change how we deliver therapies, what therapies we can deliver. And I'm going to leave you with this idea, and we can jump in if anybody has any questions. But the only way to get there is through play first, which means the path forward is not through the clinicians. It's the clinicians serving the game developers in a way that we have doctors and we've got quality and regulatory professionals and all these other folks. Of course, they got to hold that line and say, look, we need this therapeutic. It's got to be in there. But if it isn't fun, if it doesn't work, we have to keep coming up with what does work until it connects. And otherwise is first and foremost a great game, keeps you immersed and engaged, doesn't break the fourth wall where you're like, oh, there's that therapeutic part. Just has you having fun. Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns?
So in the same way that there are different types of therapies like talk therapy, EMDR, stuff like that, could you foresee something like video game based therapy being an option in the future?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And you're hitting on this other part of it as well. When people do make video games at the moment for therapy, not only are they those serious games and they tend to start with the therapy kernel instead of the playthrough, everybody wants to rule the world and have an IPO. And so they're all solving it with one game. All of you are gamers in the room. How many of you play one game? I think we know where that addiction thing is coming from for you. But what we know is if we want you in this engaged and dopaminergic state, it's going to be a lot of games, which is why we're empowering this. And it's going to depend where you are in your journey, what game makes sense. If you and I are both depressed, but we got there in very different ways, you're handling a lot of grief, I'm handling a lot of anxiety. If you put me into the world that would be most appropriate for you, I'm going to freak out. I'm not ready to think about that grief. I still don't have good control over my situation. So we're going to, over time, as we get better at this, we're going to put you on journeys. Play this, play that, play these two together. How do you feel about that? And keep directing you in places where we can model that journey for you. And also how that works for you will model journeys for other people. Because though we are unique, we are on a distribution curve and we can all learn from one another on whose games did what, right? For each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Add at least one more game to that. Take a little bit of break. Remember the boundary condition. Yeah, Corey.
Are there things?
They're going to want to give you that microphone.
This may or may not be a question for your expertise, but are there things that you've identified that could be negative in terms of game design? Like, are there things that maybe as game designers, because like that's something that we probably haven't studied a lot as game designers is what the negative impacts.
Well, it's starting to become obvious though, right? There's stuff we know out there. First thing is typically you have vulnerable populations and exposure to them, right? So social dynamics need to be monitored in certain ways. We need to be connected to be with one another, but a free-for-all chat room is probably not going to be the answer for most people if you're also thinking about how therapeutic we're seeing other stuff too, but they're always tied to the economics. Loot boxes, right? NFTs. NFTs are just fine. If you want to take your character and you want to memorialize them or sell them or something like that, that's fantastic. If you have to get the Sword of Destiny for $49.95 and you buy the Sword of Destiny so you can socially fit in with all the rest of the people, and it turns out the Shield of Alderaan is really what you required and you just experienced a $50 rug pull, that's a bit of, that's going to make you feel exactly what we felt in the outside world, which is what pulled us into gaming in the first place, right? That level of isolation, social manipulation and control, and the energy dynamics. Ken Hall is building this game at the moment. Funny enough, it's called Sword of Destiny. He does this amazing thing with the energy dynamics. The longer you play, your character gets tired and you get sluggish and you don't work as well. So after a while, you stop. That seems reasonable. You go outside. That's okay. Or you play a second game. That's okay too, right? Just these ideas. It's only really when we're trying to capture the economics, which is one of the reasons why immersive medicine is really cool. I'm not saying you don't have to make a living off your games. Studios are not cheap, correct? Right? But there's other ways to earn here, including the ability to medicinalize these games and give people access to care. That's so we can balance these things so we don't have to do some of this stuff that, sells the next, in-app purchase, which again is not wrong. It's just the intent behind what you're doing. Build cool things. Sell them at a fair price. But if you suck people into places, vulnerable populations into tough spaces, that's going to be a problem. But none of it has anything to do with the play. Right? You can't make it too fun. You can't make it so fun that someone's going to not be well. It doesn't work like that.
Do you see these as like exclusively developed from the ground up as therapeutic games, I guess, or do you think there's room for like a therapeutic mod for
maybe not even a mod sometimes? So what we're working with the agency right now, what we hope to get to the place is to say, look, Mr. Agency, a bunch of this game is just fun. Can we leave that part alone, please? Can we identify the thread that is therapeutic? And we'll control that the way you want it controlled. But come on, let's let people do mods. Let's let, if the sky turned from green to blue, I don't think we've really impacted the therapeutic ability. So we want to be able to both go forward and build these games in a way that they have the highest opportunity to be therapeutic, maximize that potential, but there's no reason we can't go backwards and take things that already exist. Also, as we build these ecosystems for treatment, not everything has to be a drug. Think about walking into the pharmacy today. Yeah, there's Advil, and it's OTC, over the counter, and that's what we're working on, over the counter. Go get it on the machine you've got and the place you want to do it, play the way you want to play, but know what it can do for you and track whether or not it's doing it. But when you walk into that store, there's vitamins too, right? So there are things that we can do from a wellness perspective as well. We don't necessarily have to put the claim on everything. We're just trying to get those claims and get, anxiety, stress, depression, those things that the FDA does not let you say unless you have run this particular gauntlet with them. We want to get that enough that people can start to go, well, like food nutrition, right? 30 years ago, we didn't know. It was sort of blissful, Big Mac times, right? And now we have a sense, right? Here in Idaho, you guys write down the calories on everything. You've totally blown my love of nachos, man. 1,650 calories, but I know. And that meant at 10:30 at night, I'm like, maybe no. So I think we can see a combination of all that over time. Any other questions? They got you running. It's right here.
So if we are working on a game already that has a lot of the pharmacy elements and it's in prototype stage, how do we work with you in your organization? Do we seek funding? Do you guys, what is your?
So let me back up and say we have, and I mean, Mike Wilson has traditionally run publishers. That means we give you some money to make a game and then we help you make it. That's who we are once we know what we're doing. Right now, we're just another struggling studio like everybody else. So we're kind of holding on to our money for us, but that doesn't mean we won't get there over time. When you say the pharmacy elements, what does that mean? What do you?
I'm working on something that I would like to talk to you about.
Okay, well, we can do that. So, I mean, there definitely is those active ingredients in the game. They have to be built a certain way and managed a certain way, right? So what we're doing on right now is letting people build their games. Then we're bolting on sort of an active ingredient thing so we can manage that part of the world so you don't have to. But progressively over time, as we study more of the games and stuff like that, an Eyes Out's game comes out and stuff like that, we're going to want to get in there and prove the specific mechanic in that game. And then once they're proven, our job is to convince the FDA that once we've shown them once that it's there, that we don't have to show them every time that it's reasonable. So, but we start with bolt-on strategies now because it lets you, be game designers, and us do the little piece that we need to do. But we are a little ways away from that just yet.
First question, do you have any active games out there in the market right now? And if so, what are they specifically treating? Any type of?
So we're going after mental health, and our indication for use is symptoms of stress. So stress and symptoms of mild to moderate anxiety, depression. Why mild to moderate? First of all, it's where the population really lives. We want to catch people up here before they get down into major depressive disorder. It also recognizes things like you get to a place, if we're talking bipolar, we're talking schizophrenia, you need that doctor. So our job is to keep everybody up here, in a place where they don't descend down and allow the docs to work with the folks that individually need the care. We don't have anything in the market right now. We are partnered with Meta on 2 titles, and it's really up to them when they come out. That was a unique part of the game market that I didn't realize. I've always had something done, and when it's done, I put it out. But we're working together with them. I'm thinking at least one will be out this year.
First of all, great presentation. So I know you mentioned that initially right now you're not looking for collaboration, obviously focusing on your first party stuff. As it relates to the data for other developers to maximize therapeutic potential in their games, are you guys planning on making the information or the metrics that a developer could use to maximize that available?
Yeah, so 100 posts on LinkedIn.
Okay, awesome.
Is a start, but that's not, I'm right here. On that last slide, it's on my LinkedIn.
Okay.
Find me, we're right there. We are collaborating with several other studios as well. So if they're in a certain place and especially if they have a certain propensity to bring their funding and bring visibility. We're helping them through that at the moment as we get going. I think we all have to get through economically. This is kind of, we ended up doing this right on the edge of the not good times or the beginning of the not good times. And so we're going to have to get our way through that a little bit, but I'm right here and I'll tell you everything I know and I will help in any way I possibly can.
Awesome. And then just my little aside, have you thought about having almost like a certification program?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. So someone could submit and then say, our team has reviewed it or have some kind of body where, this is proved to be therapeutic, I guess, or fits the guideline.
Yeah, if you guys are interested, do you want to hear a little bit of how we're doing what we're doing? Does that? Okay. So I saw 2 people. I'll take that as yes.
Yeah, I would love it.
The roadmap is first we got to prove it. And we also remember Mike Wilson is my partner in this, and what he's been doing is elevating game designers for a long time. We have to make sure that this is economically viable for you guys too. Mike and I threw our dollars in this, and we called our friends, and they threw their dollars in this, and that's what we're doing at the moment. We got to make sure that there is a market out there for it, and that the agency is going to play nice with us. Step 1. Step 2, and we're already starting step 2, building tools, because we don't expect you to come to know all the things that we've come to know to do this. We're going to de-skill this to the level where you can bring your skills as game designers. That's what we need. We don't need more FDA experts. So we're going to become that intersection. Step 3 becomes that certification process. We see it as some sort of floating let's call it game kind of pharmacy. Something that isn't particularly in any one place. You don't have to go to Meta to get it. You don't have to, jump into the Apple store. More like we'll let you be wherever you are and we'll help you track what you're doing and make suggestions on the next things. And we'll put that stamp of approval and start recommending games, especially based on your journey and watching you with your permission a little bit to be like, where are you today? How are you feeling about these things? How did this work for you? Hey, I'm a super anxious person. And there's a lot of things we can do as well to know that's true. Part of the journey as well. We want to be hardware agnostic. We don't want you to have to clip on anything or do anything because we're working heavily on accessibility to care. Over the counter means you can get it anywhere. Accessibility to care, right? Tamping down the regulatory requirements means it doesn't cost so much. Cost under control, right? More accessibility to care. And, then we really want to start doing things like there's amazing new sensing technology that's coming along. So people tree is one thing we're working on. We're going to look at your eyes, flash a light at you every now and then. We're starting to get some really interesting predictive data about what's going on there. That in combination with the player saying, this is how I feel, this is what's worked for me, we can build sort of paths or trajectories of treatment, right? When there's enough games and they cover enough of these genres and things so we have to overlap. Think one more Venn diagram. You got to love it and be having fun doing it, and not everybody loves and has fun doing the same thing. And it has to cover the treatment modalities and the places that people are. When we have enough of those, we can piece them together and then start recommending more over time. And that's where you get sort of that process. And then in the end, we see ourselves teaching game designers how to be part of the medical device sphere and really called in as experts in engagement and delivery of therapy itself.
I already have the microphone.
Perfect.
Hi.
It's good planning. You brought your own?
Yes, it's very kind of me. But I was just wondering how you're picturing this sort of materializing or actualizing once it's been approved and you have all the data and everything. Is this going to be something like we see on the Nintendo store, 5 out of 10 doctors recommend Animal Crossing for anxiety? Or we're going to be on Steam and there's going to be a label that's like PTSD approved.
Exactly. And what people don't realize is unless you're talking about the kind of medical device that you put right inside someone's body or is very, very novel or a drug or something like that, that's what FDA approval for is. Most over-the-counter therapies or most things that you see that are called class 2 medical devices, which is what this would be, are cleared. But the FDA is not clearing your device, they're clearing your language. It's not legal to say my game treats depression, even if you have a study that says it does. You still have to run their gauntlet and you have to manage your software their way. You have to be subjected to their audits, their processes, and all those sorts of things. So yes, we get to the place where people can identify with, I have this helps me with this, and we put those people together. We learned a lot about this in light therapy. Why run the gamut with a light bulb in a box? Why just put the light bulb in the box? Well, it turned out after years of doing this, and I think this is going to make sense to you. If you have high degrees of anxiety, depression, you're stressed out, maybe you're worried about what that's going to do to your job, you're worried about what that's doing to your family, what that's doing to yourself, what you might do to yourself, you need relatable terms that makes sense to you at that moment. Opportunity cost is a big deal. Someone wants to spin a crystal over your head. That might be the last crystal anybody spins over your head. And people think about it like that. So they don't want to talk about low mood, low energy. They want to say, I feel anxious. And this game says it does something for anxiety. And that's what we're working on, is being able to put those two parts together and not break the most important part of the therapeutic, which is the play, the game. Not let the agency's processes drive us into a place where we make gamified therapies versus games with medicinal characteristics and ability.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I'm sure Ryan is more than happy to stick around. Oh, we got one.
So I got here kind of late. Did you already talk about AI in game development? Because it seems like for this type of like gaming for trauma, it would make sense to have a perfectly crafted game specific to the person and specific to their trauma. So like, I feel like artificial intelligence could play a role in this to like specifically create that.
Two sides of that. First of all, the part that you missed was the games that have been most therapeutic are very accidentally therapeutic, and they're reaching lots of people and working. That's the magic. That's the thing that we've got to get put into the medical device world and allow to propagate through and do its thing. Where do I see AI coming in? So AI has been a thing I've been chasing for about 10 years. I've got patents in AI and used it for medical devices and for just a moment until I found my sensibilities, some levels of defense robotics, nothing that hurt people, no blowing up, just getting people out of trouble. But this is where I think AI fits in here. It's the learning algorithms of the paths that people are going through in these games. We are very complex individuals, but we're not as individualized as we think we are. We do sit on a bell curve, right? And whether there's 1,000 versions of us or 10,000 versions of us, there's not an infinite amount of that. So the ability to see your responses and how you work in these games and what is truly therapeutic to you, and then overlap you with folks that look a lot like you, right? That is where I see a lot of, and that's really the kind of AI that'll work too, right? And that's machine learning and it's database driven and it's possible. I get a little frustrated with AI because it's not here, but we talk like it is, right? Right? Those are just really smart related databases. Nothing's learning yet until that quantum computing thing gets solved out and we can figure out what entanglement really is. Anybody that does this stuff just knows that these are very, very sophisticated things that regurgitate at this point. But that's something where it could be machine learning could, is really great at looking at a big variety of data and saying, I can parse this out. I can figure out what's going on, and giving that information back to professionals that can use it. I do think that's a place in the near term where we could use this very effectively.
Ryan, thank you so much. Seriously, big round of applause.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again for closing us out. I'm happy you're here with your family and some of your friends. It's so great. So great to have you. Thank you.
Every time I talk, people just leave Boise. That's what happens next. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much for your questions.
Well, guys, it's a wrap on Hackfort programming, which is crazy.
Woo!
Wow, it was a zoo today. Definitely, if you had time, we have Priestess currently playing on the Hackfort music stage. She's a really great DJ. And then Mega Ran is playing right after her to close out our music. Mega Ran, if you've never heard of him, he used to be a high school teacher, now rapper, and he's one of the only musicians to have the exclusive access to the IP of Capcom and Konami. So all his music uses video game sounds, and it's all themed around music. He's a really, really fun guy. Anyways, guys, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for coming out. It was a really fun year.